Hello there everyone, this is me Ethan here, and welcome back to another movie review video. And I've now seen Avatar: The Way of Water 2 times in theaters, and it is now my favorite movie of 2022. I have a weird relationship with the first film. My dad absolutely loves the first one, and I've seen it on my TV since I was like 4 or 5, but even recently I've never gotten the hype for this movie as much as my dad loved it. So I finally gave it a go earlier this year, around like March or April, around spring or summer, and I didn't get it. I was bored, and I even fell asleep during the movie. I was not interested in James Cameron's Avatar whatsoever. But in September, James Cameron did a re-release for the first film, and I saw it in 3D the way it was meant to be seen, and I was a little bit more optimistic. My dad was really excited, my brother was really excited, my whole family was really excited, except for me, because I didn't really care for the original movie. But I finally watched it in 3D, and I gotta say, I get it. I finally get it. Watching it in a movie theater, I essentially had to force myself to sit through this entire movie, and honestly, seeing it in a theater, I was much more immersed and I enjoyed it so much more, and 3D probably helped. I was fully immersed and I didn't really care about the basic story. All the lore and the visuals and the characters are really what drove me to really enjoy this film. So overall, I'd say the original is an 8 out of 10, and I feel like before I got on with the review, I would have to emphasize my thoughts on the first film, because people's thoughts on the first film can vary, and you have to base your enjoyment on the second film based on how much you enjoyed the first film. So I wanted to preface with that. It's an 8 out of 10 movie for me. It's not a perfect movie, obviously, but if people use that same critique of an unoriginal and story that's done before with Marvel, the MCU would be dead right now, and I think it's a very unvalid critique to say just because it's a very similar story to Pocahontas or Ferngully, it's automatically a bad story. I'd say no. It does a fun, interesting sci-fi twist on a classic story, and I'd say the characters are pretty memorable if you watch them a couple times. I'm going to start out my review with the story, since that's the thing that gets most heavily criticized from the first movie, and this one is kind of similar, where you once again have the Na'vi natives against the American colonizers, and they're trying to fight against them. It's another war movie, but it kind of doubles down on everything that you loved before and takes out some of the stuff that you didn't enjoy. And this time around, Jake Sully has a family, and I think that creates a much more interesting dynamic for him. Same with Neytiri. They have a very different story this time around. They're a little bit more cast to the side, and the main characters are more so the kids this time around, which I didn't mind, but Jake and Neytiri still get plenty of screen time and plenty of really good moments, in my opinion. And the war this time is assisted by the Metkayina tribe, which is the water-based Na'vi rather than the forest Na'vi that we saw before, and I thought they were a very interesting new selection of characters to bring into the mix. It kind of parallels the original, where the characters have to learn about a new different culture and have to adapt. It's still similar, but it is brand new, and it brings some great visuals, and it brings something new still to the story, even if it's similar. And going back to Jake Sully's family, I'd say all the kid characters weren't annoying like most kid characters are in blockbusters. They did say bro and cuz a little bit too much, but I'll get to that later. They're very entertaining characters. I was hooked to the screen. I was never bored watching them. I thought they were all very well written, and all the child actors did a pretty great job, and most of these actors aren't the most well-known actors, so I appreciated the casters for going out of their way to get actors and actresses that aren't as well known, and there were some fantastic child actors, and they had some great line delivery, and overall I enjoyed their characters. Except for the sort of elephant in the room that a 70-year-old Sigourney Weaver is playing her daughter Kiri in this movie, and her story is very interesting, but unfortunately it's not the most developed. I'm assuming we're saving that for the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th movies. Whatever, it's obviously being saved for the sequels, but a lot is teased there, and you really get hooked onto her character just for her to kind of dip in and out a little bit. But Sigourney Weaver playing a teenager was a little bit odd, and some of the interactions relationship-wise with the other kids feels really strange at times, but honestly I think Sigourney Weaver did a pretty great job at playing a 14-year-old, and her character was overall probably the most interesting, in my opinion, out of all the Na'vi children, out of all of Jake's children at least. The newcomer character this time around is Spider, and I thought he was a very interesting character, but I can't really get into my thoughts without going into spoilers, which there will be a spoiler section later that you can click to. But I was kind of mixed on his character. I liked some parts. I was frustrated at some parts. I hope he's better developed in the future, but for right now, I'll leave that for the spoiler section to talk more about his character. Overall, I'd say the story is a lot better than the first one, a lot more interesting, a lot more intrigue, and the characters really help heighten these moments because there's so many different dynamics happening in this movie that I think it makes it a whole lot better because there's so much more new stuff going on, and there's just so many different character interactions that it's just so much more fun in my opinion. Now, obviously, you know the visuals are outstanding. The first movie's visuals are outstanding. I really love the visuals in the first one, but honestly, in Avatar: The Way of Water, I don't see much of a difference in the motion capture and CGI compared to the first, which just goes to show how amazing and revolutionary the first one was with motion capture and CGI, that you can't really tell much of a difference. You can maybe see the pores a little bit in their skin, but overall the visuals were fantastic. But what's really revolutionary is the underwater motion capture. That's the new revolutionary thing for this Avatar movie, is that they're filming motion capture underwater, and all the underwater visuals are amazing. I caught myself just kind of sitting there in awe, just watching these crazy alien fish just float by my screen as these children Na'vi just float around and learn how to swim underwater. And it was just amazing. It was a visual feast, and it was like nothing I had ever seen before, and it was amazing. It was by far the most visually, and I don't even know how to explain it. It's one of the most amazing parts of the film in my opinion, and it just blew my mind. And I forgot to mention that even at times I caught myself holding my breath because you can sort of see like the water line as they go in and out of the water, and then whenever they go really deep sometimes, you can like feel it. I like felt it in my chest, and I had to like calm down to breathe, and it was a really fun experience, and all the underwater stuff, perfect. Now, this movie is 3 hours long, mind you. I believe it's 3 hours and 10 minutes or 3 hours and 12 minutes. It is a very long movie, but I personally didn't feel the length just because I've gotten hooked into the world of Pandora and Avatar whenever I saw the first movie in 3D, so I'm now a little more invested in these characters than most people would who haven't rewatched the movie in a decade or so. So I was really hooked into this movie, so I didn't feel the pacing. I will say, though, that the second act does slow down quite a bit, so you can of course learn the Way of Water, but the Way of Water was simply just so interesting to me and so fascinating that I was just kind of left in wonder, and I was just watching, kind of just mesmerized. So honestly, I didn't feel the pacing. Now finally, the action here is really good, especially the final battle. I found the first act had some good action sequences. The second one, it kind of slows down and you're just kind of mesmerized by it, or at least I was. I was just kind of sitting back just in awe during the second act. But then the third act comes around and I'm just right here. I'm here. I'm on the edge of my seat. It's so intense. There's so many crazy things that happen. Let's just say Neytiri was the boss of the final battle. Her action sequence was really good, and I won't say anything more for spoiler reasons, but it was very good. It was very emotionally charged, too. There are definitely a lot of emotions, and there are points where some things happen with some characters, or one thing happens here, or one thing happens there, and I gasped out loud. That's how just intense and crazy the action sequence was. I was exhausted by the end of the movie because of it, but I absolutely loved it, and it always kept me on the edge of my seat. I was on the edge of my seat the entire movie, but specifically during the final act, it was especially intense and very satisfying to watch. Now, the only negatives that I can give this movie before going into spoilers entirely is that the first act, there's a lot of exposition. It's not until an hour in, until our second act, that we go to the Metcaina Water Tribe and learn the Way of Water. So it's a lot of exposition, what's been happening in the first 15 years. You probably guessed that, but that's what happens in the movie. And there's also a decent bit of retconning that I found particularly annoying. They set up interesting character arcs and interesting storyline beats, but it was just like, okay, if this was actually supposed to be a series in the first place and not just one movie, we would have set this up in the original movie so we could have it for the sequel. But since it looked like at first Avatar was only going to be one movie, and then it did financially so well, now we have to somehow find a way to make a sequel and have certain things happen in this movie. And you probably know what I'm talking about. It's about Quaritch. but it's slightly annoying. It creates cool character dynamics. I like what they did with it. It makes something cool. But if this was realistic and if we were really trying to create a franchise out of these movies, we would have set this up 13 years ago. Alright, now we are heading into the spoiler zone. If you don't want anything spoiled for this movie and you want to see it in beautiful 3D, go out and see it right now or see it as soon as you can and then come back to this video. But if you have, let's get into the spoiler zone right now. So first off, with our introduction with Quaritch and his new avatar body, it felt a little bit clunky to me. I did like his sort of reaction whenever he first wakes up, just punching all of his friends who are now in avatar bodies, because that's his first instinct, just to knock out as many Na'vi as possible. But it created a really, really cool new character for him, where he is now what he hated and hunted in the first movie. But he's sort of a clone of the first character, and they upload his memories and his consciousness into like this hard drive thing they introduce. And he uploaded it right before he went out on his final trek against the Na'vi in the first movie, and that's obviously whenever he died, so he did it right before. He uploaded his consciousness right before he died. So our new Quaritch in this new avatar body, he doesn't know how he died, so whenever we see him go back to that original camp and crush his original human skull like we see in the trailer, he looks back at the footage and sees the arrow that Neytiri kills him with. And then that visual is used multiple times throughout, because anytime Quaritch sees that arrow with the feathers on it, he knows, oh yeah, that's the Na'vi who killed me. That's the Na'vi who killed the original me. I'm going after her. And it's a really cool kind of visual motif, I guess you could say, and I really liked what they did with that. It was very cool. I also forgot to mention in the spoiler-free section of the video, the frame rate. This is very controversial with the remaster, that it was almost entirely in 48 frames per second instead of 23.98, I believe. I prefer all my movies in 23.98 or 24 frames per second. It's the most natural form for the eye. If you know, you know. But on my first viewing in Cinemark XD in 3D, it looked beautiful on a giant screen. It was amazing, but I did notice the jumps between 23.98 and 48, and it did bother me a little bit. The 48 frames per second it messed with my eyes, but I didn't mind it for the action sequences. But for like talking moments or whatever, I was like, why in the world are your lips moving so fast? We're just talking here. This isn't very fast paced. This is so much slower. Why is it in 48 frames per second? I didn't understand it. I didn't enjoy it on the first viewing, despite it being on a bigger screen. But on my second viewing, I saw it at my local theater, which was a smaller theater that I was in. It was still in 3D. But I didn't notice the jumps in frame rate, and I don't think it was even in 48 frames per second. I think it was in 23 or 24 like it should be, and it didn't bother me as much. Maybe I just didn't notice it this time around, which means maybe 48 frames per second isn't all that bad upon second viewing. But with my second viewing, I don't think it was in 48 frames per second. I think it was just in 23.98 or 24, and I didn't mind it as much, though the screen was kind of dim on this viewing, so that was kind of a bummer. But I liked it much better in 24 frames per second, but 48 isn't all that bad, and probably whenever you watch it on a TV screen once it releases, it won't be as bad either. What they did with the Na'vi language was kind of cool here too. At first, whenever I came out, I was really frustrated that they didn't incorporate the Na'vi language that they created for the first Avatar movie. They created an entirely new language, and I thought that was so cool. Like, you can actually learn this language. It's not just a bunch of made-up words that they scrambled together like in Star Wars and stuff. It's an entirely new language. And I was so bummed that they kind of cut back from that and essentially translated almost everything into English except for a couple words like scound and stuff, like the words that you knew, and onati kameya, all that stuff. But I was kind of bummed at first, but then it finally made sense to me that the Metkayina water tribe doesn't know English. Grace's school was only in the forests of Pandora, not the waters of Pandora, so they wouldn't know English. So all of those scenes we see between the Metkayina and the Onati Kameya, I think is the forest people's names, it's all in Na'vi because they don't know English. So unless we wanted 90 minutes of Na'vi language with translations in papyrus and yellow, there you go. We're just getting in English instead. We're translating it. And I actually preferred that much better, I think. It would be cool to see a movie in an entirely fictional language. but I think it worked a little bit better in English. And then also the way that they created an entirely new sign language for Na'vi for underwater, because I was thinking, I don't think they're going to be able to talk underwater like they do in Aquaman. That was kind of goofy. I don't think James Cameron's going to do that, so they created a sign language for the Na'vi language, and that was such a cool and clever idea, and I really appreciated the ingenuity there. And one thing that I definitely did appreciate about that sign language aspect is that they used sign language to communicate with the whales. I'm so happy the whales didn't actually talk and have voice actors or just regular actors in a giant stuffed animal thing. Anyways, I found it really cool that they were able to communicate through sign language there as well, which made it feel a little more realistic and just slightly less goofy than it did before. And another thing that I will point out that kind of ticked me off was that the parents throughout this movie kind of suck at some points. Jake Sully's a perfectly fine character at many points. I really enjoyed his character. He had some really great moments, especially in that final battle. But at times, he is not the best parent. He is absolutely a war general, and obviously he was kind of a war guy before, so it still fits with his character, but he's really got to learn throughout, and at times, you kind of dislike him because of it, because he has to learn so much and get it through his thick skull that he's got to be more than a war general for his kids. He has to be the dad for his kids, and at many times, I'm like, oh my gosh, listen to your children. But at other times, he was a perfectly fine character, and he had to develop throughout the whole entire movie, which I understand, but that was just slightly annoying to me. And then Tonawari and Ronal, oh my gosh. Their son tried to prank Lowak, Jake Sully's son, into going into the Three Brothers Rock and calling the fish, and then the whale ends up coming after him. That's not a silly prank that you could just let fly by. You just let your son fly by with, oh, it was just a silly prank, you won't do it again. That was attempted murder. Thankfully, Lowak actually survived, and that entire sequence really paid off. As much as I was annoyed with that, it brought us a fantastic underwater sequence where he's trying to run away from this giant whale, and there's always a bigger fish. And I thought that was a great sequence. I was on the edge of my seat for that. It looked great in 3D. It looked great in Cinemark XD. I hope to eventually one day see it in IMAX, of course, but it looked fantastic, and it was a great action sequence. Just the setup for it was pretty darn awful, and the parents did nothing about it. Now back to the whales, like I was saying, the Tulkun, which are the Pandoran whales, I guess, were actually a really cool part of the story. I was expecting them to be kind of a minor part of the story based on the trailers, but there was so much more of the Tulkun in here, and the Payakan character and Lowak's bond was kind of corny at first. I was like, okay, this kid is talking through sign language to a whale, and the whale's talking back to him, but then you get the backstory, and you actually kind of feel bad for this giant outcast alien whale, and it somehow works. It's like a really weird version of Free Willy, and I dug it. I actually really liked it. I actually felt for the whale, and I couldn't believe that I did. And the scene where the humans take down that mother whale and her calf was very, very emotional, and you actually just feel awful about it, and you want these human characters, ironically, as a human watching this movie, you want these human characters to die, which is a crazy thing to get you a movie to say. You're like, I want these humans to die so badly. It's a very emotionally intense scene. But I will say, though, that the juice stuff that holds the unobtainium, or wait, what happened to unobtainium? That's not unobtainium. This is some weird fluid that stops aging entirely. Like, what happened to unobtainium in the first movie? Once again, another retcon. I feel like this was just another substance for another movie that gives the humans meaning into hunting and killing these creatures. But once again, you hate these people because they only take like this much of it, and then they just toss the whale and leave it out in the ocean. And they truly make these humans look like sick human beings, and it works incredibly well, and you really hate these villains. Even though despite those two new characters, those two scientist and whale hunter guys were pretty generic, unfortunately, you hate them. They're awful people, and they very much are antagonists and villains. And that brings up one thing that I didn't have scripted or anything that I forgot to mention, is that Earth is dying and that they're trying to inhabit Pandora. That's introduced in, what's it called, like Jarhead or Bridgehead City. I wish we got more of Bridgehead City. As much as this was a 3-hour movie, I know James Cameron has his director's cuts. I want to see more of Bridgehead City, and they're trying to essentially colonize Pandora now. that the world is dying. And that's a very, very interesting concept, but it kind of just flew by in the first act after all that exposition, and you kind of just forget about it. And pretty much the main reason these humans are hunting down these whales is for that cool orange stuff that stops human aging. So kind of wish that was emphasized a little bit more, but it was a cool little nugget of information for, I'm guessing, once again, future movies. And my final little tidbits of information that I want to talk about are, once again, the final battle, but also Spider's character, since I didn't get to talk about him. Now, Spider I really liked throughout, and his relationship with Kiri was pretty fun. You not very often get a blue teenage Jesus and a Tarzan boy having a relationship, but I found that pretty cool. It's kind of weird that Sigourney Weaver is 70 and Jack Champion was, what, like 14 or 15 while filming that, and they were supposed to have kind of intimate moments here and there. Kind of weird, but regardless, I liked Spider's character. I also disliked him a little bit. It's very frustrating that he did save Quaritch, but you kind of understand because he's a clone of his dad, so he kind of has to save him and stuff, and it was annoying, but I wish there was more of that strange dynamic where he's in the middle, where Jake is kind of sort of stepdad, but he also has Quaritch now, and he kind of roots for both of them at the same time. He helps out both of them, and I wish that we got more of that family dynamic stuff with Spider as the sort of adopted-ish son that's sort of related here, but I'm assuming we'll get that once again in a future movie. A lot of setup here, but I feel like the dynamic between Spider and Jake and Spider and Quaritch could lead down a very, very, very cool path. That's what I was wanting in this movie, but I'm assuming we'll get it in the next. And then the final battle, as I said, was great, but the one nitpick I had with it that I wasn't able to talk about was, where in the world did the Water Tribe go? They show up to the ship, and then Jake is like, "This is about me, don't worry about it." And then you see them in the background a little bit, and then over time they just kind of disappear. They could have totally helped out their family, but I understand this movie was kind of about family, pretty much entirely about family and learning to make friends and stuff and learning new cultures, but they could have really helped out here. They could have seriously helped out a lot. You've got a final battle that's pretty much submerged underwater under a giant ship. Metcaina could have totally helped out with that. That was slightly annoying to me. I get why they weren't there, but once again, it's like, where did these people go? They were just set up for the entire second act. You don't really get a big payoff with the third act, except for the fact that Jake Sully and his family are now Metcaina, which I really like. I'm so happy that they didn't leave to go on to the Rock Na'vi or the Space Na'vi or whatever. I'm happy that they're staying as the Water Tribe, and this isn't just the gimmick for the second movie. But all in all, this spoiler zone was pretty much just my nitpicks for the movie that I couldn't express during the spoiler-free zone. So there we have it. There was my review of Avatar: The Way of Water. Overall, I give this a 9 out of 10. It is a fantastic sequel that doubles down on the stuff that you love from the first, while also taking away from the stuff that didn't work, like bad dialogue, which I forgot to mention. The dialogue was a lot better in this movie. Anyways, I give this movie a 9 out of 10. It is pretty easily my favorite movie of the year, and I had an absolute blast watching it. And whenever you're in a theater and you're just blown away by a movie and you enjoy almost every single second of it, even despite your nitpicks, it's a pretty great movie. So there you all have it. There was my rating for Avatar: The Way of Water. Tell me your opinions down in the comments section below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you in between on it? What's your opinion on the first Avatar movie? Are you excited for the sequels? I'd love to hear any and all opinions in the comments section below. So if you all enjoyed this review and if you all enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye and have a great day.